podcast.
I so look forward to my cup of coffee in the morning. It's the little things, kids. It's the little things that make it all worthwhile. We are grinders of beans. We grind our own beans every morning. We prepare coffee in a French press. I take it black. I do not put anything in my coffee anymore. I used to go to Tim Hortons and I would be a double guy. And I had one of those a few years ago by accident. They screwed up my order, delivered to me a double. And I tasted that thing and practically had to spit it out. So sweet it was after drinking my coffee black for many, many years now. It's like, wow. How did I used to drink that? And this is an episode, it's going to turn out, about, the wheel shifting, about evolving, about growing. And the first symbol, I suppose, is my coffee. We grind our own beans. We French press them. It is so classy and makes just a fine cup. And starting your day off with a fine cup, if you are a coffee drinker, man, you just take a minute to savor that. And it is now officially corn season, one of my favorite times of the year. This is peak summer right now, okay? This is peak summer. And we always complain up here in the Northern Hemisphere about how quickly summer goes by, and it does. And one of the reasons it goes by so quickly, I think, is that we don't take a minute to just notice it. So I'm out on a walk yesterday, and I'm making a point of noticing how green the trees are. I mean, they are at their peak right now. And how on every house I pass, there are just flowers that are vibrant, colorful, beautiful, healthy. And it's warm and the sun is out and now the corn is here. And we've just had strawberry season, which is my favorite. And you need to take a minute to just acknowledge, appreciate, bask in the season. Because June is gone, and June always gets away on me, and I tried really hard this year to just sit down and notice June. Feel like I experienced it, because we all hate the summer to rush by, and it always does. I like my cup of coffee. I like my corn on the cob. And these are the moments, kids. This is my admonishment to you. Make yourself good coffee. Do not settle. Do not settle for bad, thin, weak coffee, all right? Grind your own beans. French press them. Make it strong. Make it flavorful. Make it tasty. Indulge and enjoy that on a beautiful birds singing summer morning. Then get yourself some corn on the cob. Boil that up. Butter it. Eat it. Indulge in the greatness that is a Canadian summer, because they do not last long, and if you don't take a minute to just acknowledge that it's there, it slips by, and all of a sudden it's fall again, and then here we go. Now that has its own charms, and we'll get to that somewhere down the line. Had a really great time, as predicted, playing Pride last weekend with Carly Thomas and band. It was like a perfect night. We went on stage at about 6:30. The sun was out, it was warm, there were people. Pride is routinely just a really great event. Pride is always so open, people are always happy, having a great time, and any Pride that I've played has just been a really, in terms of energy, in terms of its feeling, it's just always been great. It's always just been a really edifying and really warm kind of time. And so it was this past weekend when we played Pride in L-Town. And there were a couple of things, a couple of extra little bits, a couple of things that I am myself proud of in relation to playing Pride last weekend. It is big stage right downtown and there's people about, and I was just proud again, and I am struck by this regularly. When I get the chance to play a bigger stage at an event like that or at a festival, just proud of being able to do it at all. I'm thinking of how terrified I was to play When I first stepped back into performing for people, which is getting to be quite a few years ago now, but I didn't play for people for many, many, many years. And then when I came back to it, and I've talked about this before on several different episodes, just coming back to it with so little confidence and so much self-doubt and so much fear of being found out for being not good enough. All of my own kind of ego stuff, all of the things that I've needed to work through as I've become an adult. And music has been a great crucible for that, and I've talked about that before. But then, play this event, big stage, and no nerves whatsoever. And I'm always so pleased by that. And it's one of these gigs where it's a lot of bands playing in a row. It's backlined, which means for the most part, all of the gear that everybody's going to need is provided by the event. Drums are provided, cymbals are provided, amps, whatever. You bring some of your own stuff, but the nuts and bolts are provided for you. Very fast changeovers, 15, 20-minute changeovers. You have to move very, very quickly. And it was just, for me, edifying to know that I have so much experience now that I can walk into a situation like that, quite apart from it being a big stage and a big event and a lot of people around, quite apart from the nerves that may once have been associated with that, just knowing what I'm walking into now, knowing that it's going to be no sound check because there's not time for that. All right, there will be a quick line check, which means we'll check our vocals and we'll do a very, very quick, rough monitor mix. And you can reasonably anticipate that once you start playing the show, you're not going to be able to hear very well, which proved to be the case. You know, the scientist Chris McCready ripped some killer freaking guitar solos on that show. I didn't hear one note he played. Didn't have time to get my monitor set up that way. You know, you can only set up the very, very basics. And I've learned along the way what to look for in the drum kit, what I need to put up of my own and how quickly to do it, what I need to adjust, how to get it where I want it, and then how to communicate via hand signals with the sound man or the monitor guy if there is one, or girl, and what I need fundamentally in my mix and how to cope with that and do it quickly and communicate with the other people on stage. I understand that it's not going to sound great and how to work with how it sounds and play off the other people and watch and listen. And when you're the drummer in those situations, you really got to drive that bus. All right, the drummer kind of always has to drive the bus. But in this situation where there's a quick changeover, we had 6 people on stage, I think. A lot to get in place and set up in a very, very short amount of time to keep things on schedule. One of the cardinal sins is to start your set late, kids. Do not do that on a festival and do not run over time, okay? Professional etiquette. In this situation where you're just doing line checks, you're going to go very, very quickly, set up and play. The drummer really has to drive that bus because the one thing everybody's going to be able to hear is the drums. So in a lot of cases, people will be paying even extra attention to what the drums are doing because they can't probably hear everybody else because they haven't had time to really get their monitors dialed in. And at a certain point, Ken the Zen had to yank the power on his monitor entirely because we did the line check and everything seemed fine. And then when I don't know what happened, they hit go on the system. We hit that first note and then it was blasting so hard out of Ken the Zen's monitor that it was like that advertisement where the guy's sitting in the armchair and he's watching the TV and it's just the sound is just blowing his hair back. That's what happened to Ken the Zen. It almost knocked him over. Something was wrong. And, he's trying to get the sound guy's attention. Please turn down this monitor. Was not working. And at a certain point, mid-song, he just sort of had to hold the note on the bass guitar and then just yank the power to shut this thing off because it was overwhelming. This is what you get into. And again, his monitor shut right off. Other people don't have everybody in their mix. They can't hear everything, can't hear properly, maybe can't even hear themselves. And the drummer is what they can hear. So there's an extra layer of pressure that comes with that. And you know that if you've played enough of these gigs, if you've been on stage enough times where the stage sound isn't ideal, you understand what you have to do. And then you take some comfort from the fact that you're playing with a bunch of other people who also know what to do. Right? They're all experienced players. And so we can walk into that situation like a platoon, on patrol, like we just know what to do. We know how to have each other's backs, and we can have fun with it. And we did that. And I think the band played great. For 2 rehearsals, we haven't played together, most of us, for quite a long time. And we went out and we did great. We crushed it. And it's not hard to crush Carly's music, man, because it is music that you can really invest in. It's music that is emotional. It's music that you really like to play. And we did. And we locked in. And I think the harmonies, from what I could tell, were good. We're on point. We played the songs well. We did a couple covers we've never done before, but we pulled them off. And it just wound up being a really good show. And I look at that in retrospect with a certain amount of pride of my own in how far I've come as a player. This is not a brag. This is just an acknowledgement that, man, I was green. So green back in the day and so frightened. And the only way you can get to a level where you can walk out on a stage like that and you can understand what to expect, you can understand what to look for, what to listen for, how to make things work, what might go wrong, what might be an issue, and how to solve that in real time as you're playing. The only way to get there is to have performed. And so for me, it's always kind of an acknowledgement of what's come before. Hundreds of shows, hundreds of situations, stuff going wrong, stuff going right, just knowing in scenarios what to look for, what to pay attention to, and what to be on top of. And you can't get there without just doing it. It's all theoretical until you're in the situation. And so I look at that experience that I've picked up along the way, and I'm just proud of it. And I'm proud of everybody on the stage who has done the same thing, because we have all made mistakes. We have all been green at one point in time. And there's a level at which I'm still green. There's a level that, to me, several of them probably, that are complete mysteries. And the only way to make them not mysteries is to experience them. And as I was playing that show, it was running through my head that I just want to play for audiences, Like, I want to play big stages. I want to play for audiences. That's not an ego thing. It's just an experience I want to have. I want to be on the road again. I want to go out and play. And I want to be in front of audiences, and I want to be in rooms. And to be in front of audiences that are there to see you, I really want to have that experience. I've experienced that a little bit. I'd like to experience it more. And it's edifying to go play a show and feel like, yeah, man, I'm still into this. Music over the past few years has been disheartening for a lot of people because the pandemic and because the way that the live entertainment industry has taken such a hit. I've said before how a lot of people who were playing in 2019 aren't playing now because they just moved on. And I felt that too. There's certain points during the pandemic when people would say to me, you must be just itching to play. And it's like, you know what? No, not really. And I began to feel a certain deflation about music, wondering, do I even want to do this anymore? Is there any point in wanting to do this anymore? And it looked pretty bleak for a while, and it felt pretty bleak for a while. And coming back into playing was difficult. I was struggling with anxiety generally. I think the world was in a lot of cases, and it felt very different and very strange. And you kind of get used to not being out at 3 a.m. on a Friday night, especially as you get just a little bit older. And so to be on that stage and to feel like, yeah, I still have the fire, man. I still have it in me. And I still want to do that. And that was another kind of thing that it was important for me to notice, which I felt at other times this summer too on gigs that I've played. It's just being reminded, I do love this, and I do want to do this, and I do want to go further with this if I can, should the opportunity present itself. And yeah, there'll be some learning to do. There'll be some learning to do, but I've developed this backlog of experience, and that will serve me in good stead. And that was a good thing to notice. The other thing to notice, and that was part of my evolution as a player, but anytime I play a Pride event, I notice my evolution as a human being. Thinking about how funny it would seem to evangelical me as a teenager, knowing that whatever it is, nearly 40 years down the line, yeah, by the way, you'll be playing at Pride festivals and loving it. Evangelical me as a teenager would have been rather shocked to hear that. And it was not evangelical me as a teenager's fault, okay? It was the 80s. And the evangelical world, I don't know if it's changed now or not. I'm not in it anymore. But at the time, most certainly did not embrace the gay community. And I grew up in a small city, a kind of a rural small city. It was just the culture of the time. This is the 80s. I've talked before about how in the 80s, gay characters were beginning to appear on TV shows, even in the 70s, but they were always the butt of jokes. And we had not reached a point yet where we viewed gay people, gay characters with any sort of empathy. They were always played for cheap laughs. I think of Three's Company. You look at just the cheap laughs that the concept of homosexuality was played for on that show. And on other shows throughout the 80s, if you had a gay character come up, it was always just cheap laughs, always at that character's expense, except, as I've talked about, Night Court, where they had that episode where there was a gay character who was just a guy. It was just a guy. His homosexuality had nothing to do with anything. The butt of the jokes was Dan Fielding's frightened and prejudicial response to this character being gay. That was groundbreaking at the time. Okay, that was not what you saw on TV shows. It was all about making fun of those people or that character and playing it for laughs and being fearful and reinforcing stereotypes. And as a kid, especially a male kid, growing up in that culture, that's just what you absorbed, right? This sort of fear of gayness or whatever. And then the AIDS crisis was happening, and there was just a lot of prejudices and judgments in church, prejudices and judgments in the general culture, especially in a small town, around that whole concept. And what we saw in the media just sort of reinforced those stereotypes for the most part. We just had not evolved. The wheel of consciousness had not turned. And so people like me who grew up in that world, that was just cultural conditioning. It's not even something that we thought about. I was not a person who was a thinker. I have to admit that somewhat reluctantly about anything. I very rarely had thoughts of my own. Now, to be fair, growing up in the evangelical world, you're not really encouraged to have your own thoughts. You just sort of take things as they are presented to you and accept them under threat of damnation, okay? But the judgment that comes with that and the intrusion into other people's lives, my observation of evangelicism is that it's just way too concerned with everybody else's life. way too concerned with judging everybody else's life. And I learned to do that too. And so you fast forward to now me playing Pride events, and that's just the result of my own wheel of consciousness turning. And once you come out of the evangelical world, which I have, you begin to drop those judgments because you suddenly no longer work from the mindset or the philosophy that created them. And when you begin to question those things, you begin to question the theology, you begin to question what you've been taught, how you were raised, and you stop working from that place. It's like, oh, I don't agree with this, or I don't agree with that, or that doesn't make sense to me. Why am I basing my whole life on any of this, right? And you begin to drop the judgments, which I have done to a large extent. There are other ones that I need to drop. And the interesting thing now is that I can't let the wheel spin around so far that I turn the judgments back on the evangelical world. I have to be very, very careful about not turning my arrows of judgment back at church, right? There's a reconciliation that has had to happen. And this is what drives me nuts when I see the alt-right and I see Christian nationalism taking hold in the States, and I see patriotism wrapped in the flag and carrying a cross over its shoulder. That triggers me, Kay. If you can handle such a snowflake using the word trigger. Trigger for me, okay? Makes me a little bit militant. So I have to be very careful about even well-intentioned judgments becoming unfair or becoming toxic to myself. It's weird being in this head, man. The point being, in the 80s, a lot of us hadn't evolved yet, and many of us, so young that we hadn't learned to question. And I had certainly never met, at least to my knowledge, a gay person, certainly not a trans person, or at least not a trans person that had transitioned, right? There were probably a lot of people. Is closeted a word I'm still allowed to use? I mean, back in those days, you had to be so freaking careful about even the perception that you might be gay. And then the trans conversation hadn't even really happened yet. Being that would be just outlandish, right? To the culture at the time, at least where I grew up. And that's why there's pride. That's why there's pride. Because it shouldn't be that people have to walk around looking over their shoulders for fear of being attacked, for simply being who they are, you know? There are parts of Canada, there are parts of the States where you still can't do that without fear of being physically attacked. And then there are parts of the world where to be out, even to be perceived as being gay, is certain death. I mean, this still exists. And so if you have a shred of empathy in you, you realize that is no way for people to live. And that is unfair. And that is cruel. And that is mean. And none of the government's business. I'm going pinko here. None of the government's business. None of any of our individual businesses, you know? But again, especially in the evangelical world, you're just so taught to be up in people's business, protecting them from hell or carrying this judgment. And I don't want my judgments to reflect back on that either. But you begin to recognize that people's lives are none of your business, Jack. And it's very, very cruel that there are people who have to look over their shoulders still for nothing other than being who they are. And the prejudicial judgments of other people make it that way. And so I am proud that my own wheel of consciousness has turned and that I've evolved as a human being from being a kid who just hadn't thought about anything to being an adult in the world and being, I think, a better person than I was. And again, I don't put blame on myself. It was ignorance and it was cultural and it was conditioning. And that was just where you come from. But over time, you grow up, man, and you begin to think about things and you begin to put yourself in other people's shoes. And once you do that, I think a lot of your judgment falls away. It should. And when I play a Pride event, I just recognize my own personal human growth and development, quite apart from my musical growth and development. And so it's edifying for me. And it was a great event. And the band played great. And the people were great. And it's always a celebration. And yeah, Pride was a lot of fun. And it's always great playing with Carly. It was great playing with that iteration of the Carly band. We crushed it. And I hope we get to play together more. Hopefully over time, we'll get more gigs booked and we'll have more opportunities because I think it's a crackerjack band, actually. And I think Carly's music is great and the way we play it is great. And I always just really enjoy it. I always really enjoy playing that music and playing it with great people at a great event. Very, very edifying as a musician, as a human being. And it provides the kind of transition that I don't know if they would appreciate, but the latest music documentary that I watched was the Indigo Girls documentary, It's Only Life After All, which debuted, I think last week maybe 2 weeks ago on Netflix. If you've listened for any length of time, you know I'm a big Indigo Girls fan. That might surprise you that 80s glam metal guy wound up being a big Indigo Girls fan, but I am, and that is the influence of my spouse or significant other. When I was listening to Cinderella and Jackal and Slaughter, etc., Poison, my spouse, who is more evolved than me, was listening to Indigo Girls records. And so when I started dating her, I too was exposed to the Indigo Girls, and we made a kind of a cultural exchange, the two of us. She suddenly found herself listening to Galactic Cowboys records, somewhat against her will, and I wound up listening to Indigo Girls. And the documentary is timely with respect to what I just talked about, because obviously they have, I think somewhat, not exactly reluctantly, but it was never the plan for them to be the flag bearers for the gay lesbian community. And I don't think they ever meant for that to happen, but that is what happened. They are both gay. Or Amy Ray describes herself as queer, and that has a slightly different connotation. I'm not qualified to go into that, but they have been the standard bearers as they were both lesbians. They were both out. And again, this is what they were in the time that I just talked about. I mean, their first records came out in the 80s, and it's not something that they really talked about. It's not something that they came out broadcasting. I mean, they were gay. They were not a couple, but they were both individually gay. But it's not something that they made necessarily the forefront of their music or some kind of message. It's not like they popped up on the scene and said, hello, we're gay folk singers, let's go. They're just songwriters, just playing their music. It became evident over time that maybe they were. And then the question was posed to them. It's like, well, yeah, we are. It's not something that they made a big deal out of, but they were among the first. Okay, this is the 80s. Again, the culture is not there. Maybe in some big cities it was, but the culture is not there. Not ready necessarily to accept that. Ellen hasn't even happened yet, right? And so they became among the first to be really publicly out and performing, and that put an enormous amount of pressure on them. And when I say that they maybe wouldn't appreciate this transition, it's for that reason. I don't think they necessarily want to be considered gay performers. I think they want to be considered performers, right? I remember interviewing Morgan Lander from Kitty, and the big deal on them in the late 90s is that they were this all-female metal band, and that's kind of how they got marketed, and that became the mythology around Kitty. And Morgan's like, we don't want to be known as a all-female metal band. We just want to be known as a metal band, right? This is not some sort of girl power thing. We will accept that. That's great. And absolutely, girls rock, let's go. But we're not coming in here as that. We're coming in here as a band. We're just a band. We happen to be girls, and we're just a band. And I suspect Indigo Girls were the same way. We're a band. We're gay, but we're a band, and so I don't think they would necessarily be all that thrilled. I'm just talking myself into a corner here. I do not mean to talk about them now as in the context of pride and whatever. It's just, it happens to be timely that I watched the documentary at the same time. And I recognized what sort of trail they had to blaze. I mean, there were not a lot of people who were out. This is the 80s, and the sort of conservative world, Reagan, AIDS crisis. I mean, this was very politically charged at the time. And for them to be out in this way wound up being really, really important. It wound up being really, really important for visibility, for messaging. I mean, they became flag bearers and really, really important ones along the way. But first and foremost, they are songwriters, and brilliant, brilliant, brilliant songwriters. And watching this documentary, it's just so interesting because they started playing together. They met when they were children, like 10, 11 years old, and they started playing together as teenagers. And so there's all this footage from back in the day of Amy Ray and Emily Saliers, who are Indigo Girls, performing together as teenagers. And then you realize, man, they were so young when they were coming up and then eventually releasing music and getting signed and writing really, really mature, deep, beautiful, poetic songs as kids. Some people's talent is just off the freaking scale. And it's fun to watch them now because they're in their 60s now. And so they'd be looking at the footage of them performing as 19-year-olds playing some song that's brilliant. And they'll be just kind of head in their hands like, oh man, I could write that song so much better now. It's just funny to look back at even brilliant people, look at their earlier work and they're just like, ah man, I could do so much better now. People are so self-critical, but you add this weird layer of pressure about being so young and so visible and out, and then kind of being obligated to carry that flag and represent that, which they have done magnificently and beautifully over the years. And they've released just wonderful, wonderful records. And I'm a huge fan. I've seen Indigo Girls live 3 times. The first time I saw them, I think it was just the 2 of them, and they were playing the amphitheater in Toronto, and Pink Floyd was playing the same night at the X across the street. So there were moments where the 2 girls and their guitars would just stop and we'd all listen to Pink Floyd with their huge stadium show happening across the street, and we'd sing along a little bit and then they'd play. And 2 guitars, 2 voices, and brilliant. Emily Saliers is such a great guitar player, such an underrated guitar player. And they have these wonderful contrasting styles. And Emily's songs are really pretty for the most part. And her voice is very clear and it's high. And Amy's songs are more gritty and her voice is more gritty. And the way the 2 of them work together is just beautiful. And you kind of look at this symbiosis. Like you met when you were children and you grew up performing together. And it's like, what sliding doors moments, what had to fall into place for you 2 to meet each other and then to develop this together and then to grow into releasing these albums. I saw them on the Lilith Fair. They were one of the big names on Lilith Fair. I saw that coincidentally also at the amphitheater. Sarah McLachlan and Jewel and Meredith Brooks and Indigo Girls crushing it, man. Great. That was the full band situation. They were so good. And then we saw them in L-Town actually a few years ago. They were here at Centennial Hall. Just the 2 of them again. And they were so great. And what accomplished songwriters. What accomplished songwriters. You become just a little bit jealous. Their ability to write a lyric, to write a hook, to write a melody, and to perform. And with so much emotion. This is what you get from them that they never phoned it in. They're always singing their lungs out. Amy Ray will tear your freaking head off with just her voice, And it's really fun to watch this documentary and just see their development as artists. And Amy Ray, God love her, it's like she knew. She always had a camera with her. Even in the 80s, she was always dragging like a big camera around with her. And she was filming everything from the little tiny clubs they started in to playing big amphitheaters and big rooms and all the backstage stuff and the studio stuff. And she's got tapes and tapes and tapes and tapes of recorded video of their whole career. And there's a certain point where they're at her house and she opens up a big dresser drawer and it's just full of cassette tapes. And what they are is rehearsal tapes. And they would just put them in and listen to them and be laughing about it. And then this song or that song. And it's like, oh, I hate this song, but everybody loves it. And you should do that. Okay, if you're a young artist right now, you probably are doing that via social media, but collecting this archive is really special. And so she's just got drawers full of rehearsal tapes, videos, and it's just fun to look at them and it's like, wow, you were so young. Those records that I know and listen to and love, right? You were children when you were writing that stuff, releasing that stuff, and then being on the road and touring, and then all of this pressure, and then this extra layer of being kind of spokespeople for the gay community. And then they became huge, huge activists for the environment and native rights, and all very useful and very potent and very powerful things. And along the way became, as it talks about in the documentary, the butt of jokes for that. There's a scene that they somehow got NBC to give them from Saturday Night Live, where a couple of the cast members are pretending to be Indigo Girls. And it's just like making jokes about them. And then there's always this kind of backlash about them being what we would call now woke liberals, jamming their agenda down our throats from certain circles, when all they were doing, which is what kind of wokeism is about, is having empathy, trying to create positive change, for people who are suffering. If that's woke, then wake me up, baby. And they've had to endure that too. Once you become the flag bearer for something, or you become recognized, particularly as an activist in a world that's very cynical, judgmental about activism, and you become the face of that, whether you intended to or not, or wanted to or not, the backlash is inevitable. And so they've had to endure people just bagging on them for all sorts of stuff that's very apart from the music, and they've had to be strong enough to endure that. And they have endured that. And they remain enduring today, still performing, still touring with this massive fan base who loves them, loves them. And they are a testament to sticking to your principles. They are a testament to believing in yourself and your own thing and doing it and suffering the slings and arrows, but having conscience about that and trying to do good in the world. And that has been the Indigo Girls' legacy, quite apart from the music that is just so good. They're so freaking talented. I was trying to go through and what's my favorite Indigo Girls song? Well, I can't give you one. I give you a playlist. I think of Kid Fears, which is an Amy Ray song. It's just so haunting and emotional. And that's the one where Michael Stipe comes in from REM, and he has a really, really powerful cameo on that. Recorded in the 80s. I tend to have liked Emily Salyer's songs. Her song Fare Thee Well from the Swampophilia record is just beautiful. Hey Jesus is another one where Emily, or at least a character in Emily's voice, is mad because her lover went away. And she's mad at Jesus, and she's demanding answers, and she's getting increasingly drunk kind of as the song goes on. This sort of raging against Jesus. Why'd you let that happen? Why'd you let me get hurt? And Amy's song Welcome Me is beautiful. Emily's song Ghost. It just goes on and on and on and on. They're just wonderful songwriters. If you haven't listened to Indigo Girls for whatever reason, just go online and maybe go to Spotify and just find a playlist, or listen to their first 4 or 5 albums, maybe the first 4. Everything up to Swampophilia was kind of the commercial peak for them. And I lost track of them after Shaming of the Sun, which is the record that came after Swampophilia, mid-90s, just because I checked out of music more generally at that point in time. And just listen to master songwriters, master storytellers, master harmonizers at work, just genuinely gifted, beautiful, brilliant people. And watch that documentary. If you like stories of bands doing it the old-fashioned way, climbing their way up through the ranks, suffering the slings and arrows, but holding on to the dream, Sebastian Bach sang, and making it, and then having this wonderful career, and then using that platform to create positive change and to support people. It's very, very inspiring and not an easy trip. Emily talks at a certain point about her alcoholism, the pressure of it all, and how she coped with it by drinking, and how that nearly ended her life and certainly nearly ended the band, and how she's recovered from that. And my goodness, man, people go through stuff, and you don't often see that when you just see the public face. But then you realize, it's like I talked about with Nickelback, Chad Kroeger talking about how difficult it has been to be the band that everybody hates. You're just walking down the street, and some guy rolls down his car window and yells Nickelback sucks at you. You don't see the behind-the-scenes stuff. You don't see a lot of what comes with the pressure and the attention and the backlash. And it's really, really inspiring the way that people show their resilience, even when you can't see it. The fact they're still here, still crushing it, and have this documentary now. Kudos to them. Brilliant songwriters. They are one of my favorite acts, actually. Indigo Girls are great. Go watch that documentary. Now, I'm going to tell you, this is the 200th episode of the podcast, by the way. I was going to do at least you feel some pressure to do some sort of 200th episode extravaganza. But nah, let's just get on with it. But it is the 200th episode. And so I should take this opportunity to say thank you to everybody who's listening, everybody who has listened over the past over 5 years now, and the people who have supported, whether that's via Patreon, patreon.com/John Huff Podcast, whether that's via merch, john-huff.com/shop. I got t-shirts, I got mugs, or just telling people about the podcast. And I want to thank our old pal Jay for that, Ken the Zen, others who have just shared the episodes along the way, because I've tried my best on social media to build a following. It hasn't worked. And I think the best thing still is if people just tell their friends who like podcasts that they might enjoy this one. If they want a little edification, want a little lightness, want something to warm their cockles, please just tell folks that these episodes exist. If they think they can get something from them, please just share them. And thank you for doing that so far. Haven't had a review or a rating in a long damn time, and I would like one. It's the 200th episode. Throw me a little birthday party. Drop me a rating and review on your preferred podcast platform. I would very much appreciate that. I'm going to wrap this up shortly, but I do want to give you some new music. I didn't have new music last week. I do this week. We'll see how long this takes. There's an artist from the UK. Her name is Rosalie James. She has just dropped a new single called Full of Chemicals, which is the title track to her forthcoming record. And I just love it, man. I just love it. I listen to a lot of new music. Most of it doesn't do much for me. Once in a while, I just happen on a song. And here it is. It's Rosalie James, Full of Chemicals. And I started digging into her, and what an interesting story she is. I mean, she is a person who has suffered mental health issues in the past, depression, anxiety. She is on the spectrum somewhere. And so there's a kid growing up with all of this mental stuff happening. And she worked for a long time in the mental health field as a social worker. She came a little bit late to the music game, or should I say, like me, came back a little bit late to the music game. And she's got this really, really compelling story about struggling with mental health and finding a way in her music eventually to begin addressing that and to begin talking about it. And it's important because there's still a stigma around that. I talk about it too on this program because I think it's important to recognize that people struggle with this stuff. And if you do, you're not alone. And it's okay. And she's writing music that presents that point of view as well. But she's not doing it, at least as far as I can tell, in a very heavy-handed way. Now, this song, Full of Chemicals, there's some very tongue-in-cheek lyrics. She's a really good lyricist. And I just love it. You've got to make a move for it to settle in. Feeling too big for my own skin. They hid away the razor blades to keep me safe. I think they call that a close shave. What a great lyric that is. They hid away the razor blades to keep me safe. I think they call that a close shave. I'm searching for something in the undertow, or hiding myself in a TV show, and we're all full of chemicals. This is kind of an Americana, kind of a pop vibe. It's super duper smooth. You ever just listen to some songs that are just really smooth? You know, it's the right tempo, it's the right groove, and you just find yourself kind of bobbing your head along. It's one of those. It's very understated, and it's a little bit cheeky, but it's just got this really great pocket. And then I realized in the literature around this song that it is written with what they call the motoric beat. Motoric, not something that I had encountered before. Motorik, the motoric beat. And they're advertising this song as having the motoric beat. And I'm like you, I'm like, what on earth is the motoric beat? Well, this is a groove that comes from the krautrock movement. And you say, what on earth is the krautrock movement? And that is a term that we probably wouldn't use if it was coming out today for this avant-garde, largely electronic, very experimental music that came along in Germany, in West Germany, in the 1960s and 1970s. There was, at the time, kind of a cultural revolution happening. As with most cultural revolutions, it was happening with the youth. And there were a lot of students in particular. Same thing was happening in America in the 60s. Students, the hippie movement, that was all about rejecting kind of traditional cultural mores. This was anti-Vietnam. This was about ending racism and ending prejudice and ending poverty and restoring and equaling the social balance. And it came out of students. The hippie movement started in universities because the world was safe enough and financially dependable enough for them to be able to go to school and to be able to take on social justice causes. And they did. And that birthed the hippie movement. And in Germany in the 60s, what a lot of students saw happening was a trend post-World War II back into an authoritarian style of government. And they looked around and they saw in their government people who had been Nazis, people who were Nazi sympathizers, people who were probably Nazi soldiers 20 years ago in World War II. And there was a slide beginning to happen amongst the West German government back into an authoritarian style of government. Tell me if any of this sounds relevant today. And so there was a lot of political unrest beginning to happen amongst young people who said, we do not want to go back to a dictatorial style of government. We see Nazis in government right now, and we are resisting that. And so there got to be student protests, and they were cracked down upon by the German government. And the students said, one of the things we're going to do, this was very organic, but one of the things they did is that they began to reject traditional German cultural stuff. And so there was a lot of traditionally based kind of German style music happening, or there was pop music happening that was very derivative and inferior to American rock music that was coming out. And we want no part of this. We don't want the traditional German entertainments, okay? We don't want bad German music. We don't want bad imitations of American music. And we're not very proud to be German right now, okay? We are not proud of the Nazi legacy. We had nothing to do with it, but we're kind of growing up with that shadow, with that stain upon us, and we don't like it. And we want to create a new Germany. We want to create a new German culture that is our Germany, and that is our culture. And so one of the outcroppings of that was this really wild, weird, experimental, often electronic pop music. Bands like Kraftwerk, bands like Tangerine Dream, bands like Neu, that was just really, really weird. It's just really, really weird. Very, very avant-garde and strange, and unlike anything else that was happening. And so this became known, I think mostly in the British press, as krautrock, and the term kraut being kind of a slur for German. And that comes in some way from the apparent German obsession with sauerkraut. It was a derogatory term used by the English in World War I, used by the English against Germans, particularly Americans against Germans in World War II. Apparently, the British preferred to call them Jerry's. In World War I, they were called the Huns because they were trying to associate Germans, attacking Germans, with the barbarism of Attila the Hun and his invasions of Europe and his empire, right? So there was a lot of marketing in World War I. There was a lot of propaganda. And so we call the Germans the Huns to conjure up this image of these just bestial animals spilling across the border to rape and pillage, which is what the Huns did to great effect. And, in certain circumstances, the Germans did too, by the way, in World War I. And so it was the British press that got a hold of this weird avant-garde German music, and they called it krautrock, and it was derogatory. And so I don't think we're allowed to say kraut now. I'm part German, so I guess I'm allowed to say it. But one of the staples, what this krautrock brought into prominence, was what they called the Motorik beat, or motoric beat, however you say it wherever you're from. And having heard the beat, I'm like, really? Like that needs its own name? And all it is a standard 4/4, and it's usually kind of mid-tempo. And it's just a kick drum on all of the eighth notes except for beat 2 and 4, which are snare drums. So if you can listen to that, dun 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 dun, right? And then you're like, well, they needed a name for that? It's a pretty standard beat, but I guess at the time it wasn't. And the idea was that this was supposed to be machine-like, right? This perpetual, never-ending, propulsive, forward-moving, sounding, feeling beat. And some of these songs would be like 20 minutes long of just dun 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 dun. And we hear that all the time in music now. I mean, it's not unusual at all, but I guess at the time it was. And so they called this thing the motoric beat, and motoric being German for motor skill. And so it was about this movement, this propulsion, this forward momentum. And I guess that became the basis of a lot of krautrock music. Okay. And so this song by Rosalie James, Full of Chemicals, employs, at least in part, the motoric beat to the extent that they advertised it as such. So, okay, it does that. But my real vibe around this song is that it's just super smooth. Love the vocals on it. It's hooky. It's more of a pop Americana song, but it's got this dark edge. And you know I like a dark edge. You know I like a shoegaze edge. And I think that motoric beat really lends itself to shoegaze because shoegaze is supposed to be dreamy and trance-like, right? It's supposed to lull you into something. And this song kind of does that, and that beat kind of does that. I feel like it's got a dream pop edge. I feel like it's got a shoegaze edge. I really like her voice. And I just really like this song, Full of Chemicals by Rosalie James. And so that is my new music recommendation to you on episode 200 of the John Huff Podcast. And that's it, kids. That's it. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for supporting. I want to thank you for being here. Check out Indigo Girls. Check out Carly's music. Check out that documentary. Check out Rosalie James. And remember, kids, good things happen when you put yourself out there. All of these people are evidence of that, and I firmly believe it. I've seen it in my own life. If I had not put myself out there, I could not have walked onto that stage on Saturday under those circumstances and been perfectly in my element. You know, that is just a product of putting myself out there. I wouldn't know any of the people that I played with who are my close friends. I wouldn't have this freaking podcast. It's all a product of having put myself out there many, many, many years ago to step into performing. And it can change everything, man. So if there's something you're frightened to do, something in some way you're frightened to put yourself out there and do, take a shot at it, man, because it can change your life utterly, as mine has been changed. And you are part of that, and thank you so much. Gonna shut up, shutting up, except to say, hey, kids, I'll check you later. Yeah. I called down an apocalypse to get some peace. Not my circus, not my monkeys. I'm shrinking a feeling into clicks and spins, or making a mountain out of everything. Yeah, we're all full of chemicals. Yeah, we're all full of chemicals.